I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Movie Star Magic. And this week, we're going to be looking at the alluring career of the great Michelle Pfeiffer. But if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is look at a movie star and talk about what makes them great. The sort of first two-thirds of the video, I break down their career arc, breaking it down into 3 different chapters and talking about a defining movie within that chapter and a defining role that they had that helps explain where they were in their sort of arc. So just sort of a historical understanding of how they've evolved as an actor while getting to talk about some of their great performances. And then the last third of the video, we really tried to break down and understand what is their movie star magic, what makes them great, what is that interesting thing that they have, that they bring to all of their movies that makes them such a compelling movie star. When we go to a theater to see, a Tom Cruise movie, he got something special. When we go to the theater to see a Michelle Pfeiffer movie, we're going in with a preconceived notion. We're going in with the expectation that we're going to like her. What is that sort of interesting element that she has? So stay tuned to the end of the video for that, or if you want, just go to the description and click on the timestamps. But jumping into chapter 1, I'm calling this chapter the movie star in training, because her sort of career arc is very sort of early on. It's very sort of a burst of talent in different types of roles in which she sort of proves to Hollywood that she can be a movie star. Certain actors like a Meryl Streep or Val Kilmer, they sort of burst onto the scene with the first or second movie and are movie stars pretty much right away. And then other actors, it takes them 10 years before they're able to get something of a lead substantial performance. And Michelle Pfeiffer is in that in a certain respect. She does some supporting stuff, she does some TV, but most of her supporting stuff is sort of kind of low rent stuff like Charlie Chan movies and whatnot. But when she has her sort of first main lead role in Grease 2, that's sort of the start, where she's sort of the main star, I'd say, or co-star at the very least, of this sort of next Grease installment. Grease 1 was a huge success. They put in the money for Grease 2, hoping it's the same sort of thing. And it's sort of like, hey kid, can you be a movie star? Can you sort of follow up? And I really like Grease 2, although the movie doesn't do too well. But then the year after that, she gets Scarface, and it's like, oh, hey, can you be the femme fatale? Can you go opposite Al Pacino? She does. She's great in that. That movie does very well. And then, well, not at the time, but, critically and enough money and reputation and whatnot. And then after that, she does another zag and does Lady Hawk with Richard Donner, and then does Into the Night with John Landis. So it's like, okay, I'm going to show you now that I can do comedy. I have comedic timing in a John Landis comedy, but I can also do fantasy in Lady Hawk and go opposite a Rutger Hauer or Matthew Broderick. I can go opposite all these big actors and sort of breaking out of, I think, that Scarface mold, but also sort of showing a lot of people, which is why I say movie star in training. It's showing Hollywood and other people that she can do all different kinds of things, all different kinds of genres, and she can be opposite a lot of these sort of great actors, and what is that kind of a dynamic, and can she actually do it? And she does. Grease and all these movies, they're successful and ultimately shows that she can do it. And I think the final sort of role in this chapter is going to be a defining role, because it's the final one which sort of puts a stamp on her and says, yes, she is a sort of capital A-list movie star. And that's Married to the Mob, Jonathan Demme's movie right before The Silence of the Lambs, and is almost as good, in my opinion. It is a classic, great movie. And in terms of Michelle's role in it, just in terms of her role in her career in this chapter, just having a good movie helps. That's the first thing. But her role as an actor within the movie is instrumental in helping us understand why she's such a great movie star. Because we have a character who is married to a mob member in which he dies, and then she's trying to get out of that life and start a reputable life for herself despite the mob and the FBI's insistence. And just because of the way the character is positioned in the genre of the movie, it's a comedy for the most part, and Michelle is great at that. She shows she can handle a lot of that humor with the boys, and she can be very funny, and she has strong comedic timing, which is really the first comedy in true senses that she does and as a movie star, and shows us that she can really hang. So she can be funny and charismatic as a movie star, which is a classic kind of a prototype and an archetype, and she's great at doing that. But then also, just in terms of the structure of the character and the movie, this is a very likable character, someone who wants to make an honest living, an underdog person who is starting from the bottom and is trying to work her way up and trying to get away from these crooks in the government and these crooks in the mob. And it really just positions her as someone that because it's a successful film, and it's a good film, and it's a funny film, she immediately becomes likable in combination because of her humor and because of that sort of underdog likability structure to the movie, in which she excels very much so at, where it's not about just her looks like it is in something like Scarface. There's another thing going on, there's another sort of element, and she sort of breaks out of that mold, I think, with this movie. Then chapter 2, I'm going to call this chapter An Object of Desire, because ultimately this is not the character actor magic, this is movie star magic. And while she sort of showed that she can be any kind of a movie star, pretty soon on afterwards, a Michelle Pfeiffer type starts to develop. And we all know this with movie stars. When you go see a Tom Cruise movie, you know exactly what you're going to get. That's a type. He's crafted and built that brand for 40 years now at this point. And Michelle Pfeiffer, soon after her sort of variety and movie star training, sort of defines herself and often takes these characters where she is an object of desire. She's often playing opposite a man who is deeply and madly in love with her and sort of attracted to her attractor beam. But if you can really just go down the line and look at her movies, Fabulous Baker Boys, Jeff Bridges is just, she's waiting for Jeff Bridges to get her crap together so that he can sort of fall in love with her. But eventually he does. Even something like Dangerous Liaisons, John Malkovich is trying to fall in love with her for sort of an ulterior motive, but still in terms of that pursuit. Age of Innocence, it's, trying to get something that you can't have but desperately want. Frankie and Johnny may be the classic example of this, where Al Pacino's character is just totally madly in love with Michelle Pfeiffer's character. It's always sort of someone being incredibly attracted to them and willing to do whatever they want. And sometimes she's sort of innocently vulnerable in something like Fabulous Baker Boys, or sometimes she's being manipulated herself in something like Dangerous Liaisons, or sometimes she's sort of resistant to it in something like Frankie and Johnny. So there's different sort of avenues and types to it. I mean, even look at a movie like Tequila Sunrise, you literally got Mel Gibson and Kurt Russell pining over her. That is sort of her position in this sort of latter period. And this period is definitely sort of the height of her. If you want to go from, I'd say, probably like 82 to 95, but really that sort of period of 88 to, 91? Where she gets nominated for 3 Oscars in 4 years. It's just like incredible, where she is the it girl. She's doing everything. She can be in all these great movies and works with these great directors, Martin Scorsese and Richard Donner and John Landis and Jonathan Demme and Stephen Frears, and plenty of great directors that she works with and has successes with them, Brian De Palma, whatnot. But then sort of the end of this chapter, post What Lies Beneath, it's just, admittedly takes a break from Hollywood, raising kids, and when she comes back, she is in another chapter. But the defining role for this period I went with is the Age of Innocence. And while I can talk about this movie forever, particularly its directing and the story given by Martin Scorsese, I could talk about that forever. I do want to just mention here about Michelle's contribution to the actual project herself and what she's able to bring. And I do think this is a movie that defines her as not just a great movie star, but a great actor. That she can go opposite of Daniel Day-Lewis and really hold her own. And, it's a classic sort of period drama, 1800s repression kind of a drama, where Daniel Day-Lewis's Archer clearly loves this woman, but can't be with her because of societal politeness and whatnot. And I think the movie, in a way, almost works. Her performance in particular, Michelle's performance, works on like 3 different levels. You have that sort of base sense of longing, of desire, these 2 people that love each other but can't because of this sort of societal politeness. And you have that kind of classic repression cinema of longing, of yearning, of lustfulness that is sort of unspoken but clearly at the forefront. So you have that element, but then also the sort of second layer is when we see the movie evolve. And if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about, where the sort of longing and lust and desire turns almost into frustration and anger and contempt. So she adds sort of another layer to that character and it explores a whole new side of Michelle that we haven't necessarily seen. And then also, I think on the third level is if you see the movie as through Daniel Day-Lewis' character Archer, if you see it through his perspective, then you see, well, Michelle Pfeiffer, her character is almost a representation of his own viewpoint, of this sort of idea and symbol of freedom and lustfulness and sex. And then you have to realize, okay, well then she's playing that. She's playing a version of somebody else's viewpoint of her within the sort of societal, political context of society at the time. It's a very sort of interesting kind of performance if you look at it that way as well. So she's doing a lot within the movie that I think is underrated. I mean, Is she as good of an actor as Daniel Day-Lewis? Probably not, but nobody else really is, and the fact that I think she was able to sort of go one-to-one with him and do well too, and sort of bring in so many of those sort of romantic and lovely kind of feelings. She really does quite a lot within the movie, and is one of my favorite performances of her. Then chapter 3, I'm calling this one the colorful extra, and like I mentioned, she starts to take a little bit of a break from Hollywood, raising her kids, and then when she comes back, 2007 is a big year for her, where she does Hairspray, Stardust, and I Can Never Be Your Woman, and the former really do succeed, and the latter doesn't. And the similarity between the formers is that Stardust and Hairspray are supporting roles. She is not the sort of main star anymore. She's now sort of in the back seat, versus a movie like I Could Never Be Your Woman, which is kind of Amy Heckerling, but does sort of feel like that Nancy Meyers-esque rom-com path that sort of worked for Diane Keaton and Meryl Streep, but didn't really work for Michelle Pfeiffer. She wasn't really into that mold. So now she does this sort of extra and sort of supporting roles. And there's always been sort of a comeback hunger, I think, for Michelle. There's been so many comebacks for her, where it was like 2017, oh, she's in Mother. Is she going to get an Oscar nomination for this? No. What about 2020, French Exit? Is she going to get... no, not really. That movie isn't successful. And it's not like she's making poor decisions. She's working with great directors, Tim Burton and Barry Levinson and Darren Aronofsky. She is making sort of the quote-unquote right choices, but those movies aren't always successful, and she sort of hurts because of that. So I do think there's always still, and there's a desire for her to make a little bit of a comeback, but you have to look at the past 10, 15 years now, where she's been doing a lot of these supporting roles. She'll do, a supporting role in Maleficent 2, or will join the MCU in the Ant-Man sequels, and she's great at that, and extending her legacy at that, but I don't think she's ever going to be a mainstream sort of A-list movie star. At one point I thought, okay, well, maybe she just needs a big prestige TV show, and she does that. She does it with Suzanne Bier, who just came off The Undoing, which just did a big success with The Undoing with Nicole Kidman, and made Nicole sort of a big movie star again. And then she does The First Lady, and that doesn't really totally work out. So there is kind of poor choices sometimes, but I think the choices are correct. I think the projects just ultimately don't work out, which is a bit of a shame, but I do think she's in this period where she can be the extra, the supporting person who is interesting and fascinating, can be funny for a little brief period, but she's definitely a supporting role versus sort of the movie star status that she once had. And, to be frank, nobody's ever a movie star for forever, so it's not like she did something bad or whatnot. It's just that's the sort of stage of her career that she's in at this moment, and probably will be as she sort of ages. And for the defining role in this period, I just want to talk about Hairspray. It was a big sort of household favorite of mine growing up. They would always show it in school, that and Elf would always sort of be on. So I've seen the movie a million times, and she's just so great at being really sort of campy and over the top and theatrical, but also sort of serious to the plot of the movie. And I actually think she's the one actress who was able to have sort of a connective tissue between the sort of seriousness and sincerity of the movie itself, but also sort of link back to sort of the campy elements of the John Waters films. She sort of is the one actor who's able to sort of bridge that gap, and she's just sort of great and over the top, and can sing and can dance, but leans into that sort of sinister, racist, villainous portrayal that she sort of adopts in the movie as this sort of sly seductress that is there just to cause chaos and wreck. And she's so clearly having one of those performances where she clearly is looking like she's having a great time, and of course referencing back to her sort of days as Grease 2. It's a great classic movie, and definitely in one of my generation that I latched onto early on. So talking about her defining feature, I use the descriptor the independent woman, because I thought the sort of traditional narrative of Michelle Pfeiffer and her career as this sort of sexual being for no just cause who was only there for her looks, I thought that was kind of off and incorrect. That when watching and rewatching a lot of her movies, the sort of theme of three-dimensional, interesting female characters came up over and over again. Because of course Michelle can never have been an everyday kind of a woman, a regular gal, because if you look at her, she's incredibly good looking, one of the most beautiful people to have ever donned the screen. So when we're looking at her sort of movies, there always has to be the sense of attraction or, shock or sort of just allure of her characters. There has to be, just because of the way she looks. But the way she uses that and the way she sort of develops characters and chooses characters that utilize that, I think is very interesting. And it's because she's always in a position of power, that she's always the one in control of those sort of attraction and those relationships. just look at all of her movies. Grease 2, she's straying away from her friends because there's sort of arcane rules over who they can date and not date. Married to the Mob, she's trying to start an honest life. She's very likable and moralistic first, before her good looks. Frankie and Johnny, of course, Al Pacino is pining over her, but she's not always that interested. That's not always the point of the movie. The point of the movie is her getting over her husband, leaving with her best friend, and her becoming, ready to be loved again and love herself before she's ready to love someone else, and her being in sort of this funk. And that's her character in a three-dimensional kind of a way. Even if you look at something like Scarface from a 2022 viewpoint, you look at her character and she's quite clearly depressed. It's almost a movie about mental illness and the fact that all of this stuff and money and clothes and cars won't sort of fix that deep hole within inside you. And she's even more relevant today, I feel like, her character and how she responds to things. And if you look at the movie like Dangerous Minds, she has a teacher, so she has respect, she has the attraction immediately. But the emotional climax of the movie doesn't work just because he's a teacher, but it's because of what the character does throughout the movie. The patience, the empathy, the interest that she has with her students is the reason why that emotional climax works in the end. So Michelle, just as an actor, was able to create so many different fascinating female characters who don't always have everything together, who aren't sort of stoic superheroes or sort of diminutive, submissive women, that are sort of sometimes criticized of the past. She is creating people that feel real, that don't always have their stuff together, but do want to do that and are ambitious and are trying to figure things out and always feel like real people to meet. So just because you're able to create a career based on a lot of that, I think there should be sort of a little bit of a correction as to her sort of opinion and her position within Hollywood, because Michelle's done quite a bit in terms of creating interesting female characters, in my opinion. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, stay tuned.